Inside Aldermore Palace, a dangerous rumor was spreading faster than the winter frost creeping across its stone halls. The Emperor's forgotten husband, the Omega everyone once pitied, the one who used to beg for a single glance, had stopped chasing him entirely. No more letters, no more tears, just silence, closed eyes, and an unsettling appetite for pastries. To the ministers watching from the shadows of the council chamber, that kind of stillness could only mean one thing. He was plotting something, a coup perhaps, or something far quieter and far more dangerous. Even the Emperor found himself unable to look away. What was Oliver Hart really hiding behind that lazy, unbothered smile? And why did the most feared man in the Empire seem more curious than afraid? Stay with us till the end to find out exactly what happened. Oliver Hart's last thought before he died was embarrassingly simple. 5 more minutes. His alarm had been screaming for almost 20 minutes. The same 3-note chime, looping over and over on his nightstand. Somewhere under the pillow, his phone buzzed with a missed call from his manager, the DoorDash bag he'd ordered at 2 a.m. Sat cooling outside his apartment door on West Belden Avenue, because he hadn't been able to summon the will to get up and answer the knock. Outside his window, the L train rattled past, and somewhere below, a garbage truck groaned through the Lincoln Park alley. He buried his face deeper into the pillow. I'll deal with it later. Darkness swallowed him whole. Your Highness? A timid voice drifted into his ears, soft as a moth's wing. Your Highness, please, you must wake. Oliver frowned. His bed felt different, softer, somehow, in a way that made no sense for a 27-year-old graphic designer's IKEA mattress. And the air didn't smell like his apartment, all instant coffee and old takeout. It smelled like beeswax candles and crushed lavender. He cracked one eye open. A carved wooden canopy stretched above him, dark oak inlaid with pale gold leaf in the shape of climbing vines. Heavy velvet curtains, the color of a deep bruise, swayed faintly in a draught that smelled of wood smoke and stone, a draught carrying the distant clang of the bell tower at Aldermore Palace, seat of the Solent Empire, somewhere beyond the walls of the capital city of Ravensdale. Beyond the curtains stood a cluster of servants in long gray tunics, every one of them watching him with the particular anxiety of people bracing for bad news. One of them, a young man barely out of his teens, looked seconds from bursting into tears. Oliver blinked. What? The room went dead silent. The young man dropped instantly to his knees, forehead nearly touching the stone floor. Your Highness, did this servant do something wrong? Oliver sat up slowly. The mattress beneath him was absurdly, criminally comfortable. The kind of comfortable that made you angry no ordinary bed would ever match it again. His hands, resting on the embroidered blanket, weren't his hands. Long fingers, pale, elegant, entirely unfamiliar. Oh, that was concerning. A spike of pain split behind his eyes, and with it came a flood. Not memories exactly, but someone else's whole life pouring into the space behind his skull all at once. A wedding beneath black iron chandeliers dripping with candle wax. A groom in dark ceremonial armor who hadn't smiled once through the entire vows. Years of lonely dinners eaten alone in a cold dining hall, cold glances exchanged in crowded courts, letters written by candlelight and never opened. Flowers sent back untouched, still wrapped in their ribbon. Standing for hours outside a closed study door, just to catch a glimpse of broad shoulders disappearing around a corner, being turned away, every single time. The memories kept coming, faster now, a flicker of hope, crushed flat again and again, until they curdled into something darker. Accusations of treason, iron manacles, a cell with no window, a scaffold built of dark wood in a courtyard full of silent, watching nobles. Oliver squeezed his eyes shut against the headache. When it finally faded, one fact remained, glowing and undeniable in his mind like a phone notification he couldn't dismiss. I transmigrated. He knew this story. It was the one his college roommate, Priya, had shoved into his hands sophomore year with the words, "The suffering is so worth it, trust me." A dark, sweeping fantasy romance called The Winter Throne, about a cruel young emperor and the Omega husband nobody in the story bothered to love back. The husband, Oliver Hart, a name so ordinary it had made Oliver laugh out loud the first time he read it. What were the odds? Wasn't even the main character. He was set dressing. The tragic, forgotten consort everyone in the fandom either pitied or mocked, depending which chapter you were on. If the plot held, he would spend years chasing a man who would never turn around, and then he would be falsely accused of conspiracy and executed on that same dark wooden scaffold before the Emperor ever said a kind word to him. Oliver stared up at the canopy. Years of chasing someone who doesn't love me, constant scheming, public humiliation, execution. He counted it off silently like a grocery list. Sounds like a lot of work. The servants exchanged confused glances at his silence. One stepped forward, hesitant. Your Highness? Oliver turned his head toward a lacquered side table, where a stack of ribbon-tied letters sat waiting, the previous Oliver's latest, most desperate attempts to win a heart that had never once looked back. He didn't need to read them to know exactly how they'd end up. Unopened, in a drawer, forgotten. Bring those here, he said. The nearest attendant hurried over, visible relief washing across her face at having a task. At once, Your Highness. Oliver took the bundle. Without ceremony, he ripped the top letter clean in half, then the next, then the next. Your Highness, someone gasped. By the time he'd finished, torn parchment covered the floor like the world's saddest confetti. Oliver dusted off his hands, deeply satisfied, the way he used to feel after finally unsubscribing from 40 newsletters at once. I'm hungry, he announced. The servants relaxed, visibly grateful for solid ground. Shall this one send for breakfast, Your Highness? Breakfast for 8. 8? I want to try everything. Oliver pulled the blanket back up until only his eyes showed over the top. Wake me when it's here. Within seconds, he was asleep again. Percy Adler, 24. Oliver's personal attendant. Nervous, sharp-eyed, and quietly the most competent person in the entire East Wing, though nobody would guess it from how easily he flustered. By the time breakfast for 8 arrived, trays of honeyed oats, roasted pears, soft cheese, warm bread, and a small mountain of berry tarts. The news had already crossed the palace faster than the food had. The consort tore up every letter he ever wrote to His Majesty. He didn't even ask if the Emperor had read them. They say he ordered breakfast for 8 people, then went back to sleep. Every servant told it a little differently. Every version sounded equally impossible. Percy Adler, who had been assigned to Oliver's household exactly 4 months ago, and had never once seen his master's mood shift from quietly devastated, stood at the foot of the bed, holding a cup of tea he wasn't sure was still wanted. Your Highness, he tried. The tea will go cold, said Oliver, from somewhere deep in a truly enormous number of pillows. There's also, later, Percy set the cup down very carefully, the way a man sets down a bomb, and retreated to report to the head steward that yes, it was true. His Highness really was just sleeping, a lot, on purpose. In the Hall of the Long Winter, morning court had just adjourned when the whispers finally reached Emperor Adrian Blackwood. Adrian Blackwood, 29, Emperor of the Solene Empire, Alpha. Cold, precise, and utterly unreadable, the kind of man whose silence made grown generals sweat through their armor. His expression, as always, did not change. Repeat that, he said. The kneeling attendant lowered his head further. Your Majesty, Consort Hart has been behaving unusually since this morning. Unusually how? He destroyed every letter he had ever written to Your Majesty, all of them at once. Silence settled over the emptying hall like snowfall. Adrian almost laughed, an urge so foreign it startled him more than the news itself. The Omega who wrote him 3 letters a week for 2 years? Impossible. He has also declined to leave his chambers. So? He is sleeping, Your Majesty. Adrian looked up properly for the first time, sleeping. Yes, Your Majesty. The Emperor dismissed the remaining court early. No one dared ask why. 3 days passed. 3 quiet, golden, entirely unbothered days in which Oliver discovered that being the neglected husband of a distant, terrifying emperor was, in fact, an excellent lifestyle. Nobody expected anything of him. Nobody knocked before 9. He slept in the mornings, ate an unreasonable amount at midday, wandered the private garden when the weather allowed, and wandered right back inside the second it got too warm for comfort. If this was exile, he'd take it. He'd take it happily. The rest of the palace, unfortunately, did not agree. He missed morning greeting again, the noble consort of the East Wing hissed, nearly cracking her teacup against the saucer. Her attendant, kneeling, nodded miserably. Yes, my lady, and yesterday, he said he'd overslept. The day before that, he said breakfast mattered more. Another consort covered her mouth in scandalized delight. Isn't this entirely unlike him? Very unlike him. The old Oliver, the real one, whose memories now lived like ghosts by St. Oliver's own, had arrived before dawn every single morning for 2 years, hoping for even a glimpse of the Emperor's cloak disappearing down a corridor. He had never once missed it. Now he wasn't showing up at all. By the end of the week, the rumors had teeth. He'd declined the poetry circle. He'd declined the flower festival. He'd declined a charity dinner for war orphans, which frankly made even Oliver wince a little when Percy told him, though not enough to actually get out of bed for it. His Highness is resting, was the polite excuse sent back, over and over, until nobody in the palace believed a person could rest that much. In the small council chamber, several ministers exchanged uneasy glances. Chancellor Marcus Webb, 54, senior advisor to the crown, sharp, cautious, deeply allergic to anything he can't explain. "This cannot continue," Webb said, stroking his graying beard. "He refuses every gathering, avoids every noble house. He hasn't approached His Majesty once since that first morning." "Which is precisely why we should be concerned," Webb continued, before anyone could relax. The room went quiet. "When a man changes this completely, overnight," he said slowly, "there is always a reason. You think Consort Hart is planning something?" "I think," Webb said, "that we have badly underestimated him." The others nodded gravely. It made a terrible kind of sense. Perhaps years of rejection had finally taught the seemingly harmless Omega to trade emotion for strategy. Perhaps every missed dinner was a calculated move. Perhaps every nap was another piece being placed on a board none of them could see. At that exact moment, several rooms away, Oliver accepted a second peach tart from Percy's trembling hands, took one bite, and declared it objectively the best thing that's happened to me since I got here, entirely unaware that the Imperial Council currently believed him to be quietly preparing for war. The knock came at midday, right as Oliver was deep in negotiations with himself over whether a third tart constituted a reasonable life choice. It did. "Your Highness," Percy said, voice climbing half an octave, "His Majesty has arrived." Oliver, cocooned to the chin in blankets, cracked one eye open. "Tell him congratulations." Percy looked like he might actually faint. "Your Highness, he's here." The doors swung open before Percy could finish. Heavy, unhurried footsteps crossed the polished stone floor, and the whole room seemed to fill with pressure, the way the air changes before a storm. Oliver turned his head, unbothered, and got his first real look at the man he was apparently married to. Adrian Blackwood was exactly as bad as the memories had warned. Tall, genuinely, unfairly tall, with black and silver ceremonial armor over broad shoulders, dark hair pushed back from a face that looked like it had been carved rather than born. Cold gray eyes swept the room and settled on Oliver with the flat weight of a verdict already reached. No greeting, not even the ghost of a smile. "Leave us," Adrian said. The servants dropped into bows and vanished so fast Oliver almost admired the choreography. "There goes my quiet afternoon," Oliver thought, and sighed internally. Adrian waited. By every account in Oliver's borrowed memories, the old Oliver would already be halfway out of bed, robes straightened, words tumbling out too fast in his eagerness. Instead, nothing. Oliver stayed exactly where he was, blanket pulled to his chin. The silence stretched long enough to get uncomfortable. Finally, Adrian spoke. "I hear you've changed. Explain yourself." Oliver considered the ceiling. "Can this wait until after my nap?" The room seemed to actually freeze. Somewhere beyond the window, even the breeze appeared to hold its breath. Adrian's eyes narrowed a fraction. "What did you say?" "I'm tired." Oliver yawned, entirely genuine. "We can talk later." No one, not a general, not a rival king, not the Dowager herself, had ever told the Emperor of Selene to come back later. "Do you understand who you're speaking to?" Adrian said. Quiet and very even. "Yep, and?" Oliver pulled the blanket up another inch. "I'd still like to finish my nap." For a long, strange moment, neither of them moved. Then Adrian let out a short, humorless breath, not quite a laugh, and turned on his heel, cloak sweeping behind him like punctuation. The doors slammed shut hard enough to rattle the window glass. Oliver counted to 5. "Is he gone?" A pale, shaking Percy peeked back in. "Yes, Your Highness." "Good." Oliver closed his eyes. What a strange, terrifying man. Out in the corridor, Adrian's footsteps slowed to a stop halfway to his study. For the first time in longer than he could remember, his thoughts snagged, and stayed snagged, on the husband who hadn't so much as looked at him properly in 3 days. Wesley Finch, 15, the youngest page assigned to Oliver's household. Clumsy, earnest, terrified of doing anything wrong. It happened on the 5th day, and it happened fast. Wesley, running an errand across the inner courtyard with a tray of medicine bottles for the household stores, tripped over an uneven flagstone directly in the Emperor's path. The tray went flying. Glass shattered. One bottle, a rare northern tonic, expensive enough that its cost alone could feed the boy's family for a season, splashed dark across the hem of Adrian's cloak. Wesley went white as chalk and dropped instantly to his knees on the broken glass, not even flinching at the cuts. "Your Majesty, forgive this unworthy servant." 10 lashes, said the captain of the guard on reflex, already reaching for the boy's collar. For his carelessness before the emperor, Adrian said nothing. Said nothing was, in the palace, its own kind of yes. Oliver, who'd wandered out to see what the commotion was about, barefoot, blanket creased, entirely unprepared to witness a child about to be beaten over spilled medicine, didn't think about it. He simply stepped between the guard and the boy. "He's 15, Oliver said, "and the floor's uneven right there. I nearly went down on it myself yesterday. If anyone's careless, it's whoever hasn't fixed that stone in God knows how long." The captain blinked. Nobody moved. Even Wesley, still on his knees, looked up at Oliver like he'd grown a second head. "You're defending a servant," Adrian said slowly, "over damage to my person." "I'm defending a kid who's about to get whipped for tripping," Oliver said. "If you want to be mad at something, be mad at the stonework." The courtyard held its breath. Adrian's cold gray eyes moved from the ruined cloak to the shaking boy, to Oliver, standing there in bare feet with his hair still mussed from sleep, entirely unbothered by the fact he was, in theory, arguing with the single most powerful man in the empire. Something in Adrian's chest shifted, small and unfamiliar, like a key turning in a lock that hadn't been touched in years. "Fix the flagstone," Adrian said at last, to no one in particular. He looked back at Wesley. "Get up. See a physician for those cuts." He turned and walked away without another word, cloak still stained, and did not look back to see the way Oliver knelt right there in the courtyard to check the boy's bleeding hands himself, muttering the whole time about how somebody really should have fixed that stone weeks ago. That night, alone in his study, Adrian found himself staring at the same paragraph of a trade report for the better part of an hour, unable to stop replaying 6 words. "If you want to be mad at something." No one had ever spoken to him like that, not out of ignorance, but because they simply weren't afraid enough to filter themselves. He didn't understand yet what he was feeling. He only knew that for the first time in years, someone in this palace had looked at him and seen a person to argue with instead of a throne to appease. The first time Emperor Adrian passed the consort's private garden, it truly was an accident. He'd finished inspecting the northern barracks, and the shortest route, back to his study, happened to run alongside Oliver's courtyard wall. Through the gate, he caught sight of a figure beneath a flowering crabapple tree. Oliver curled on a reclining richa with thin blanket over his legs, a book splayed open and entirely unread on his chest, eyes shut, one hand dangling loose over the armrest. The afternoon breeze stirred a loose strand of hair across his forehead. "Asleep again," Adrian murmured. The servant behind him wisely said nothing. The next day, he passed the garden again. Also, he told himself, a coincidence. This time, Oliver had migrated to the upper balcony, chair angled with suspicious precision to catch the shade while still letting the wind through. A small table beside him held a bowl of half-eaten grapes. Adrian stopped walking. Again? 3 days later, he found Oliver asleep beside the reflecting pool, shoes abandoned in the grass, one hand trailing lazily in the water, while several fat golden koi nudged curiously at his fingers. It was, against all reason, a peaceful sight. Adrian stood there far longer than the walk required. When a fish splashed water onto Oliver's sleeve, Oliver wrinkled his nose in his sleep, pulled his hand back, and rolled onto his other side without ever waking. Adrian almost smiled, almost. By the end of the week, the servants had started keeping count. "That's 6 times His Majesty has passed this way," one maid whispered. 7, corrected another, "and every time His Highness is sleeping. Perhaps," the first ventured, "His Majesty simply enjoys the view. Don't say such dangerous things." Oliver's routine, 4 weeks in, had settled into something close to perfection. Wake, eat, nap, wake again, eat a little more, nap until dinner, repeat. He considered it, on balance, an excellent schedule. The palace had other plans. The trouble started at a small formal dinner the Dowager insisted Oliver attend, his first public appearance in a month, and only because Percy had begged so sincerely that Oliver hadn't had the heart to refuse. Rows of nobles, endless small talk. A goblet of dark-spiced wine placed at his elbow that he hadn't touched yet, distracted instead by an argument 2 seats down about tariffs. It was Adrian's hunting hound, an enormous gray wolfhound named Ash, who'd taken an inexplicable liking to Oliver over the past week, and had wandered under the table looking for scraps. That saved his life. The dog knocked the goblet clean off the table with an enthusiastic swipe of its tail. Wine splashed across the marble floor, and within seconds began to hiss and blacken at the edges where it touched an old scorch mark in the stone. The hall went silent, then erupted. "Poison! Seal the doors!" Adrian was on his feet before the words finished leaving anyone's mouth, crossing the length of the hall faster than a man his size should reasonably move, one hand already gripping Oliver's shoulder to steady him. "Are you hurt? Did you drink any?" "No," Oliver said, blinking at the scorched floor, mostly just annoyed. "That was actually really good wine, too." Adrian stared at him. "You were nearly poisoned, and you're upset about the wine. It smelled like blackberries. I was going to try it after the tariff thing wrapped up." For half a second, something that might have been a laugh caught in Adrian's throat before he crushed it back down into fury. Turning to bark orders at the guards to seal every exit, question every hand that had touched that table. By morning, the palace had a new rule. Nothing reached Consort Hart's table without being tasted first by 2 separate stewards, and guards stood at his gate day and night. Oliver, for his part, mourned the wine for a solid 2 days, and privately thought the whole thing was a wildly disproportionate amount of security over one glass he hadn't even gotten to drink. Captain Theo Lang, 35, commander of the Imperial Guard, gruff deadpan, has seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore, was, however, not prepared for this. Lunch, the day after the wine incident, was served in the garden beneath the crabapple tree, the way Oliver preferred whenever the weather cooperated. He'd just settled his chopsticks over a basket of steamed dumplings, herbed cheese and mushroom, his current favorite, when the gate guard announced, in a voice that cracked slightly with disbelief, "His Majesty has arrived." Oliver paused mid-reach. "Again?" Every servant in the courtyard dropped instantly into a bow. Adrian strode in, dark travel cloak still dusty from an afternoon inspecting the eastern wall, expression flat and unreadable as ever. His gaze swept the table, then Oliver, then the empty second chair. "You look recovered," Adrian said. He waited. So did everyone else. Normally, according to the old Oliver's memories, this was the part where the consort would scramble upright, straighten his robes, and beg for a moment of the Emperor's time. Instead, Oliver simply glanced at the empty chair and gestured at it with his chopsticks. "There's a seat." The servants collectively stopped breathing. Captain Lang, standing guard by the gate, stared straight ahead and pretended, with great professionalism, to have heard absolutely nothing. Adrian looked at the chair for a long moment before sitting down without a word. A steward hurried to lay out a second set of chopsticks. The silence stretched, thick enough to spread on toast. Oliver, having already forgotten the unexpected company, returned his full attention to lunch, and noticed with some dismay that the dumpling basket had ended up sitting suspiciously close to Adrian's side of the table. "You're hoarding the dumplings," Oliver said. Adrian raised one eyebrow. "Am I? They're too far away now." Another silence. Then, matter-of-factly, "If you're going to sit there, you might as well pass them over." Captain Lang's composure cracked very briefly into a cough that sounded suspiciously like a laugh badly disguised as a cold. Adrian looked down at the basket, then back up at Oliver, this outrageous, sleep-mussed man who was apparently unafraid to lecture the Emperor of Solène about dumpling distribution, and, without a word, picked up the basket and set it in front of him. "There, thanks." Oliver took 3, then, after a moment's consideration, a 4th. Only once satisfied did he push the basket back toward the center. "You can have some too if you want." The servants nearly fainted collectively. Offering food to the Emperor as though he were an ordinary dinner guest bordered, in every book on court etiquette, on treasonous. Adrian looked at the basket for a beat, then, to the visible astonishment of every witness in the courtyard, reached out and took one. "They're good today," Oliver said, mouth half full. "They are," Adrian agreed. No one dared say a word. But as lunch went on, nobody quite caught the way the corners of Adrian's mouth had eased, just slightly, into something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't far off either. For the first time in longer than he could remember, sharing a meal hadn't felt like an obligation to be endured. It felt unaccountably like the best part of his day. The very next day, another table appeared under the crabapple tree. 2 chairs. 2 sets of chopsticks, already laid out before either of them had said a word about it. Oliver eyed the arrangement. "Did we invite someone?" Percy, hovering nearby, tried very hard not to smile. "His Majesty said he'd be joining your Highness for lunch from now on, Your Highness." Huh. Oliver considered this with the gravity of a man weighing a minor life decision. As long as he doesn't hoard the dumplings again. Meanwhile, in the Hall of the Long Winter, the Imperial Council had reached a deadlock over the eastern grain routes. Half the ministers pushing to expand the river canal before winter, the other half insisting the Treasury couldn't survive the cost. Voices rising steadily over the course of an hour until Chancellor Webb finally rubbed his temples and called for a recess he clearly needed more than anyone. It was in the middle of this that a page burst in, breathless. "Your Majesty, Consort Hart is outside." Every minister turned. Adrian frowned. "Why is he here?" He said you forgot to eat lunch. The hall went so quiet a pin might have been heard landing on velvet. Oliver was escorted in a moment later, looking around at the rows of unfamiliar, staring faces with the exact expression of a man who has walked into the wrong meeting at work and is regretting every choice that led him there. "So many people," he muttered, mostly to himself. "What do you want?" Adrian said, not unkindly, exactly, but with the flat precision he used on everyone who wasn't Oliver. "The kitchen wanted to know if you're eating in my garden today. They already started cooking. Said it'd go to waste if you don't show up." A few ministers suddenly found the floor extremely interesting. Adrian regarded him for a long moment. "We'll discuss it later." "Fine." Oliver had no further business here and turned to go, except two ministers behind him had already resumed their canal argument at full volume, and something about the noise made him pause out of pure exhausted curiosity. "Your Highness," one of them said, half out of desperation, half hoping the mysterious, oddly composed consort might have some insight. "In your judgment, what should be done?" Every eye in the room swung toward Oliver. He had, in point of fact, absolutely no opinion on canals, grain, or the Treasury, so he gave the only honest answer available. "Do whatever seems best to you." He yawned, leaned against the nearest pillar, and, completely unintentionally, closed his eyes for just a moment because standing for that long after a nap-deprived morning was frankly exhausting. A young minister nearby whispered to his colleague, "Look, he's meditating, listening without needing to speak." "He must already know how this ends. Truly unfathomable," the other murmured back, deeply impressed. Oliver, in reality, was trying very hard not to fall asleep standing up. The debate rumbled on for another quarter hour before someone finally landed on a compromise. Expand the canal in phases, easing the cost across 2 seasons. That satisfied both sides. Weeks later, the plan worked exactly as hoped. The eastern farms got their water. The Treasury held steady. And the story that spread through the palace was, of course, that the emperor's quiet consort had silently foreseen the correct outcome, requiring only closed eyes to see the future. When Adrian heard the rumor, he scoffed under his breath. Ridiculous. His husband hadn't been meditating. He'd been dozing off, standing up. Hadn't he? For some reason he couldn't quite explain, Adrian found himself wondering, more than once that week, whether Oliver's absurdly simple advice had been sheer luck, or something else entirely. Lady Eleanor Blackwood, 58, the Emperor's mother, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued. Mrs. Nothing. The gifts started arriving without warning. Oliver was halfway through breakfast when 2 attendants appeared with an ornately carved box, which turned out to contain an assortment of pastries so elaborate they looked closer to jewelry than food, spun sugar shaped like tiny songbirds, honeyed almond cakes, glazed berry tarts dusted in gold leaf. "His Majesty heard your Highness has a fondness for sweets," the attendant explained. Oliver picked up a songbird pastry, bit into it, and went briefly, blissfully silent. "Tell him he's oddly generous." 2 days later came an avalanche of blankets, furs, quilted silks, down-stuffed coverlets in every shade of blue and gray. Oliver stared at the pile taking over his room. Did winter start early? "His Majesty ordered new bedding," the steward explained, "after hearing your Highness complain the mattress wasn't as soft as it used to be." Oliver vaguely recalled mumbling something like that during a half-asleep moment days ago. He hadn't expected anyone to actually act on it. A week after that, gardeners arrived and, by sunset, had transformed the far end of his courtyard into a small, riotous field of wildflowers, their sweet scent drifting straight through his open window. "I definitely didn't ask for a garden," Oliver said, baffled. The head gardener bowed. "His Majesty selected these personally, your Highness. He heard you mention once that the scent reminded you of spring back home." Oliver stood there a long moment, quietly unmoored. Home. Chicago hadn't smelled like flowers. It had smelled like hot pavement and the lake in summer. But somewhere in the old Oliver's memories was a half-formed wish for exactly this, spoken once, in passing, to no one in particular. And somehow, Adrian had heard it. "He's a very strange man," Oliver murmured. The servants quietly, unanimously agreed. The Emperor had never once cared what any consort preferred. And yet somehow he now knew that Oliver liked sweets over jewels, warm blankets over silk robes, wildflowers over rare imported orchids, small, unglamorous things nobody had thought to ask about before. That same afternoon, at a garden party hosted by the Dowager, Adrian found his attention drifting during a conversation with a visiting noble. Viscount Sebastian Ashford, 26, minor nobility from the western provinces, elegant, ambitious, has made no secret of his interest in the Emperor's attention. "Your Majesty," Ashford said smoothly, refilling Adrian's cup with practiced grace, "I prepared this blend myself. I do hope it suits your taste." Adrian accepted the cup without really looking at it, his gaze already drifting past the pavilion toward the far-shaded corner, where Oliver had predictably fallen asleep against a stone pillar, one of his absurdly enormous pillows tucked under one arm, a half-eaten pastry balanced precariously on his knee. "Your Majesty?" Ashford tried again. "It's fine," Adrian said, not really answering, already rising from his seat. The whole pavilion went quiet as he crossed the garden, ignoring several confused, hopeful looks, and knelt briefly beside the sleeping Oliver to gently push the slipping pastry plate back onto the small table and tuck the pillow more securely under his arm before it could fall. Oliver sighed in his sleep, entirely unaware, and settled deeper without waking. Adrian rose and walked back without a word, as if nothing at all had happened. Behind him, the pavilion remained utterly silent. No one present could recall the last time the Emperor of Solène had shown anyone, let alone in front of half the court, that particular kind of unthinking tenderness. Dr. Julian Reyes, 26, the youngest physician in the Royal Medical Corps, easygoing, quick to laugh, has become a regular visitor to Oliver's courtyard on the Emperor's own orders, much to the Emperor's eventual regret. Because of the wine incident, the imperial physician began visiting Oliver every 3 days, under strict instruction from Adrian himself. "No lingering effects are acceptable," he'd said, in the tone of a man issuing a military directive, which was how Dr. Julian Reyes found himself becoming a regular fixture in Oliver's garden. "Pulse is steady," Julian said one afternoon, withdrawing his fingers from Oliver's wrist with a satisfied nod. "You've recovered completely. Great. So I can stop drinking the awful tonic now?" "Afraid not," Oliver groaned theatrically. "It tastes like regret and old socks." Julian laughed, a real, easy laugh. "I'll have the kitchen add honey. Enough honey to erase the flavor entirely?" "I'm not sure an entire jar would manage that." "You underestimate honey," Oliver said solemnly, and Julian laughed again, loud enough that Percy, arranging tea nearby, had to hide his own smile behind a teacup. Over the following days, Julian's visits stretched longer than strictly medical necessity required. He brought candied ginger to help with the tonic's aftertaste, told absurd stories from the medical corps, an elderly general who'd once mistaken horse liniment for cough syrup and spent an afternoon convinced he could outrun a cavalry unit, and, more than once, laughter drifted clearly out of Oliver's courtyard and across the palace grounds. Unfortunately, the Emperor happened to be walking past on one such afternoon. He stopped just outside the open gate. Inside, Oliver was doubled over laughing at something Julian had said, wiping at his eyes. "You made that up," Oliver gasped. "I absolutely did not. I'll swear it on my medical license." Adrian's jaw tightened very slightly, in a way he couldn't fully explain to himself. Why does he laugh like that for him, and not? He cut the thought off before it finished, unsettled by how much it had bothered him. The next visit was no better. Julian finished his examination, patted Oliver's shoulder in easy farewell, a perfectly ordinary, perfectly innocent gesture, and said, "Take care of yourself, Your Highness." Adrian, arriving a moment early, witnessed the whole thing in silence. "Dr. Reyes," he said, once Julian noticed him and startled into a hasty bow. "Your Majesty, I hear the southern coastal towns are dealing with an outbreak of fever." Julian blinked. "They are, Your Majesty. They'll need a skilled physician." Of course, Your Majesty, but—" "You leave in the morning." The courtyard went dead silent. Julian, thoroughly baffled but in no position to argue with an imperial decree, could only bow again. "This humble servant understands." After he left, Adrian sat across from Oliver as though nothing at all unusual had just occurred, pouring himself tea with perfectly steady hands. A few days later, during his routine checkup with a new, considerably older, and much less chatty physician, Oliver glanced toward the gate out of habit. "Huh, where's Dr. Reyes?" "Transferred, Your Highness," Percy said carefully. "Oh, guess we're short on physicians lately." Percy nearly choked on his own breath. There were, in fact, dozens of physicians in the royal corps. Exactly one had mysteriously vanished. Across the table, Adrian sipped his tea with the calm, unreadable composure of a man who had absolutely nothing to do with it, his expression giving away nothing at all. Though if anyone had looked closely enough, they might have noticed his ears had gone the faintest bit pink. The intruder never made it past the courtyard wall. Imperial guards caught him mid-climb, blade still sheathed, before he'd so much as touched the ground on the other side. By dawn, the whole palace knew. Someone had tried again to reach Consort Hart. In the small council chamber, the questioning of the captured man dragged on for hours without a single confession. Oliver, blissfully unaware any of this was happening, spent the morning in the palace kitchens sampling the new batch of honey biscuits and declaring, with great authority, that they needed slightly less cinnamon. By afternoon, a formal decree arrived at his gate. Security around his residence would be doubled again. "Again?" Oliver said, around a mouthful of biscuit. "His Majesty has declared this the most heavily guarded residence in the inner palace," Captain Lang reported, with the weary patience of a man who'd said several versions of this sentence recently. "Oh, that's nice." Oliver took another biscuit. Lang blinked. "That was it? No fear, no gratitude, nothing? Just, that's nice." That evening, Oliver returned from a slow walk around the garden pond, yawning, and pushed open his bedroom door to find someone already occupying his bed. Adrian sat against the headboard in plain dark sleep clothes, an unopened book beside him, looking entirely too comfortable for a man who had presumably never once slept anywhere but his own imperial chambers. Oliver stared. "Why are you in my bed?" "The intruder wasn't acting alone," Adrian said, as though this fully explained everything. "I'll be staying here." "That's your whole plan?" "Yes." There was a long silence. Finally, Oliver sighed, kicked off his shoes, and climbed onto the far side of the bed, only to notice, a moment later, that there was exactly one blanket. "You're the Emperor," Oliver said. "Surely you can requisition a second blanket. I didn't want you getting cold." Oliver looked at him sideways for a long, assessing moment. "Fine, but don't steal my pillow." For a heartbeat, the whole room went very still. Then, at the corner of Adrian's mouth, something shifted. Not a smirk, not the cold, distant expression he wore for everyone else. Something small, genuine, the first real smile anyone in this palace had seen from him in years. Oliver missed it completely, already absorbed in arranging his pillow to exact specifications. "Good night," Oliver mumbled, already half asleep. "Good night," Adrian said, quieter than he meant to. Within minutes, Oliver's breathing evened into sleep. Adrian lay beside him a long while, watching the rise and fall of his shoulders, still unable to explain what it was about this man, who never chased him, never performed devotion, never once asked why the Emperor had ignored him for years, that had somehow become the most peaceful part of his day. Without quite deciding to, he reached over and pulled the blanket a little higher over Oliver's shoulder. By morning, half the palace had heard that the Emperor had spent the night in Consort Hart's chambers, and none of the guards posted outside had seen him leave. Oliver, stretching awake beside a still sleeping Adrian, frowned at the ceiling. "Wait," he thought, with the mild alarm of a man noticing a gas leak. "Is the Emperor falling for me?" He considered this for exactly 4 seconds, decided it was absurd, and rolled back over to sleep another 20 minutes. After the night they'd shared a bed, something in Adrian simply never reset. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. If Oliver sat down to eat, Adrian appeared within minutes, as reliable as sunrise. The kitchen stopped asking whether to set a second place. They simply did, every time, without being told. "You've become predictable," Oliver observed one afternoon, watching Adrian settle into the seat across from him, with a stack of official reports under one arm. "Have I? You always show up right before the soup." "I hadn't noticed. You also steal my tea." Without looking up from his reports, Adrian picked up Oliver's cup and took a slow sip. "I believe this is my tea." "You switched the cups when I wasn't looking." "I did, sneaky." Percy, refilling the teapot nearby, had long since given up hiding his smile. Days folded into each other, easy and unhurried. Adrian worked beneath the crabapple tree while Oliver did what he did best. Nothing at all, gloriously, unapologetically. Sometimes they talked. More often, they simply existed in the same warm silence, and neither found it strange. One afternoon, Oliver woke from a nap to an empty chair across the table. "Where's he gone?" "An urgent council session, Your Highness," Percy said. "Oh, lunch was served anyway." Oliver picked up his chopsticks, set them back down, picked them up again. The table felt quieter than it should have for one missing chair. "Has the soup gone cold?" "No, Your Highness." Strange. He wasn't very hungry after all, it turned out. By the time Adrian finally arrived, the sun was already low and gold over the garden wall. "My apologies," Adrian said. The council wouldn't stop arguing. They rarely do. Oliver glanced at the untouched plate of honey pastries sitting off to one side, still under its cloth cover. "I saved you some." Adrian looked at the covered plate, then at Oliver, something unreadable crossing his face. "For yourself, for you." A pause. "You like these more than I do, I know. Then why?" Oliver shrugged, entirely unself-conscious about it. "Figured you might want one after a bad day." For the first time since he'd taken the throne, Adrian forgot for one full minute about the memorials waiting on his desk. "Thank you. You're welcome." Oliver pushed the plate closer. "They're still fresh." Adrian picked one up. For reasons he couldn't quite name, it tasted sweeter than usual. Rain came without warning one afternoon, dark clouds rolling fast over the eastern wall, the first cold drops striking the crabapple leaves before anyone thought to move the tea service inside. Oliver, predictably, remained fast asleep in his reclining chair beneath it, blanket slipping slowly off his shoulder onto the wet grass. "Your Majesty," a servant ventured. "Shall we wake him?" Adrian looked down at Oliver's peaceful, rain-damp face for a long moment. "No." He set his own reports aside, walked out into the drizzle without hesitation, and slid one arm beneath Oliver's knees and the other behind his back, lifting him with barely any effort at all. Oliver stirred but didn't wake, instinctively curling closer, cheek finding the warm curve of Adrian's shoulder. "Warm," Oliver murmured, so soft only Adrian heard it. For one full heartbeat, Adrian forgot entirely how to breathe. He carried him the whole way back to the bedchamber without a word, rain soaking steadily into his shoulders, while Oliver's fingers found and curled loosely into the front of his tunic, unconscious and trusting. Adrian looked down at him, and something in his chest that had been clenched shut for years finally, quietly, gave way. "I'm in trouble," he thought. Completely, hopelessly in trouble. By morning, the whole palace had reached the same unanimous whispered conclusion. The emperor was hopeless, not as a ruler, hopelessly, helplessly in love. Even the guards had stopped pretending otherwise. "His Majesty smiled again yesterday," one murmured to another outside the gate. "I saw him carry the consort through the rain himself, with his own hands, no less. If you ask me, they ought to hold the wedding ceremony again, properly this time. They're already married." "Right." Oliver, blissfully oblivious to the entire conversation, sat at the breakfast table the next morning and found himself glancing more than once at the empty second chair. "Where is he?" he asked before he'd quite meant to. "Morning council, Your Highness," Percy said. "Oh!" Oliver picked up a warm roll, took one bite, set it back down. Breakfast quieter without him. Percy, pouring the tea, allowed himself the smallest of smiles. It seemed His Highness had finally noticed something the rest of the palace had known for weeks. Lady Eleanor Blackwood, intercepting her son outside the council hall, one afternoon that would become in later years a story told at every family dinner. "You've been difficult to find," she said. Adrian inclined his head. "Mother!" She studied him a long moment, then smiled the particular smile of a woman who already knew every answer to the question she was about to ask. "Are you planning to keep pretending, or have you finally noticed?" "I don't follow." "You've practically moved into his courtyard. You send him sweets. You replaced his bedding because he mentioned once that it wasn't soft enough. You planted an entire garden because he said flowers reminded him of home." She folded her hands into her sleeves. "You're in love with your own husband, Adrian." He didn't answer immediately. There had been a time, not so long ago, when the thought alone would have seemed impossible. He'd believed, for years, that Oliver's old devotion was born of obligation, of the political marriage forced on them both. But this Oliver had never chased him, never performed affection to win favor. He'd simply built a small, quiet, unhurried life out of naps and pastries and long afternoons, and somehow, without ever asking, let Adrian in. "I think I am," Adrian said finally. His mother's smile widened. "I thought as much." That evening, Adrian arrived in the garden carrying a small carved box. Oliver looked up from his reclining chair. More sweets? The kitchen made your favorites. You spoil me, I do. Adrian sat across from him, and they ate beneath the old oak tree that had replaced the crabapple as the garden's centerpiece, once autumn stripped its blossoms, a gentle breeze scattering the last golden leaves across the table between them. After a while, Oliver glanced sideways. You've been smiling a lot lately, have I? Do you dislike it? No. Adrian set down his cup. I think it suits you, actually, whatever's making you smile. The simple words landed harder than Adrian had expected them to. He looked at Oliver for a long moment, then quietly set his own teacup down. Oliver, I need to tell you something. Oliver blinked at the sudden seriousness. Even the servants nearby seemed to sense it, withdrawing without being asked, leaving the two of them alone beneath the drifting leaves. For a while, neither spoke. Only the rustle of the branches overhead filled the silence. Finally, Adrian broke it. I spent years believing affection was something people used against me, he said. I assumed your feelings back then were no different. Oliver listened quietly, saying nothing. Then you stopped chasing me. I was tired, Oliver offered. I know. You also became difficult. I was napping. You ignored me. I wanted to keep napping. You dismissed me from your bedroom. I was busy sleeping. You told me to pass you the dumplings. They were closer to you. A short laugh escaped Adrian before he could stop it. When did I become this ridiculous? I don't think you're ridiculous, Oliver said, tilting his head. I think, he paused, searching for the right words, you're actually a genuinely nice person, underneath all the intimidating emperor stuff. Adrian's heartbeat picked up, unbidden. You bring me pastries. You make sure my blankets stay warm. You planted an entire field because I like the smell. Oliver smiled, small and a little shy. You had the physician transferred out of jealousy. Adrian looked up, caught. You knew? I suspected. Then why didn't you say anything? I was waiting to see if you'd figure it out yourself. Adrian let out a long breath. So you've known this whole time? Not the whole time, Oliver said. For a while I just thought you were being weird. I was, Adrian admitted. He took a slow breath, steadying himself the way he might before addressing the entire court, except this felt far more dangerous than any council session. I love you, Oliver. The words hung between them, plain and unguarded. Oliver stared at him, and for a moment the fantasy world, the palace, the old Oliver's tragic memories all fell away, leaving just this, a quiet garden, an emperor who'd learned to laugh again, and a heart that had, somewhere between stolen dumplings and rain-soaked afternoons, quietly fallen without permission. Oliver stood. He walked around the small table until he stood directly in front of Adrian, who watched him, silent and still. You're right, Oliver said. Adrian frowned slightly. About what? I do like quiet. Oliver smiled. Turns out I like sharing it with you more. Before Adrian could respond, Oliver leaned down and pressed his lips to Adrian's, soft, brief, faintly shy at the edges. When he pulled back, he scratched the back of his neck, suddenly awkward. Was that okay? For the first time in his entire reign, the Emperor of Solène was completely, thoroughly speechless. Then he reached up, cupping Oliver's face with a gentleness no one who'd ever seen him on a battlefield would have believed possible. I think, Adrian said, you can do better than that. This time, he closed the distance himself. The second kiss was slow, unhurried, carrying everything neither of them had known how to say out loud until now. When they finally parted, Oliver rested his forehead against Adrian's, breath uneven. So? Oliver murmured. So? You're staying then? In your garden? In your bed? Fine. And the pillow? Oliver sighed with great theatrical suffering. I suppose I'll share. Adrian laughed, a real laugh. Warm enough that even the servants, hiding just around the corner of the wall, gave up pretending not to listen, and grinned at each other in the dark. The feared, unreadable Emperor of Solène had finally found something worth smiling for, and Oliver, 3 months into a life he never asked for, discovered that falling in love, as it turned out, was a great deal less exhausting than running from it, especially when the person on the other end of it kept showing up with dessert. 1 year later. The strangest part of being married to an emperor, Oliver had decided, wasn't the palace, or the guards, or the fact that people still occasionally forgot themselves and called him the sleeping oracle behind his back because of the canal incident nobody would let him live down. It was that Adrian had learned to nap. Badly, at first. He'd sit down in the garden with every intention of reading through a stack of reports, glance over at Oliver dozing in the next chair, and 20 minutes later Percy would find them both out cold, The reports scattered across Adrian's chest like he'd been ambushed mid-sentence. He used to sleep 4 hours a night, Percy confided to the head steward one afternoon, watching the Emperor of Solène snore softly under a crabapple tree with his consort's head on his shoulder. Now he naps during the day, on purpose. Don't tell the council, the steward said. They'll think it's a state secret. The crabapple tree in the garden had bloomed again that spring, the same tree that had lost its blossoms to autumn, the year they first sat beneath it during Adrian's confession, now full and pink-white and humming with bees, as if the garden itself had waited a full turn of the seasons just to celebrate with them. It had been, by any account, a good year. The wedding, the real one, the one Adrian had insisted on holding again properly, despite the fact they were already legally married, had been a lavish, slightly chaotic affair that Oliver mostly remembered for the truly heroic quantity of cake, most of which he and Adrian had eaten together at 2 a.m. after sneaking away from their own reception. "This is treason," Adrian had said solemnly, cutting himself a second slice. "Against who? The etiquette masters. They specifically told me not to." "Live a little," Oliver had said, and fed him a bite off his own fork, and that had somehow become their favorite inside joke for the rest of the year. Live a little, deployed any time one of them wanted to talk the other into something faintly reckless, like a third dessert, or skipping a council meeting, or once, memorably, an entire afternoon spent teaching Adrian how to properly build a blanket fort, which he took to with the terrifying focus of a man planning a siege. "You've fortified the pillows wrong," Adrian said, frowning at Oliver's structural choices. "There's no wrong way to build a blanket fort. There is absolutely a correct load-bearing arrangement for the central support beam. It's a pillow, Adrian. It's engineering." Oliver had laughed so hard he'd nearly knocked the whole thing down, and Adrian, utterly serious, utterly ridiculous, had caught the collapsing blanket wall with one hand without even looking up from his calculations. Dr. Julian Reyes, eventually recalled from his southern posting once Adrian decided enough time had passed to no longer look suspiciously vindictive about it, still visited twice a month, ostensibly for routine checkups. Adrian sat in on every single one now, arms crossed, radiating the specific energy of a man supervising a business transaction he did not trust. "His pulse is fine," Julian said, for what had to be the 40th consecutive appointment. "It's been fine for a year. Check again," Adrian said. "Your Majesty, I really don't think, again." Oliver, extending his wrist with the patient weariness of a man who'd stopped fighting this particular battle months ago, caught Julian's eye and mouthed sorry while Adrian pretended not to notice either of them. "You know," Julian said afterward, packing up his kit, "I've treated soldiers with less paranoid emperors." "He's not paranoid," Oliver said. "He's just thorough," Adrian supplied, from the doorway, arms still crossed. "That," Oliver finished, grinning. The pillow, the original absurdly enormous one that had started this whole mess, still lived on their bed, joined now by an entire dynasty of ridiculous oversized pillows Oliver had commissioned in the intervening months. One shaped like a wolfhound, in honor of Ash, who'd become an official member of the household after the wine incident and slept across their doorway, most nights like a very large, very smug guard dog. One shaped like a crescent moon. One that Adrian had, without any prompting whatsoever, secretly ordered made in the exact shade of blue Oliver liked best, and then pretended it had simply arrived by mistake when Oliver found it. "By mistake," Oliver repeated, deeply unconvinced, holding up the suspiciously perfect pillow. "The seamstresses are unreliable, Adrian. It's a very common shade of blue. You had it made. I have no idea what you mean." Oliver had thrown the pillow at him, gently, and Adrian, the Emperor of Solène, feared across 3 provinces, terror of every hostile delegation who'd ever sat across the negotiating table from him, had caught it against his chest with a smile he still, a year later, seemed faintly embarrassed to be caught wearing. Council sessions still ran long, some evenings, and Oliver still occasionally showed up uninvited to remind Adrian that dinner was getting cold, a habit the ministers had, after the first dozen occurrences, simply stopped being surprised by. Chancellor Webb, once so convinced Oliver was orchestrating some elaborate political scheme, had eventually cornered Percy privately to ask, with visible embarrassment, whether His Highness truly had no hidden agenda whatsoever. "His hidden agenda," Percy had said, "is a second helping of dessert." Webb had gone very quiet, then very red, clearly recalling several months of increasingly baroque conspiracy theories he'd presented to the entire council with total confidence. "I built an entire report," Webb muttered. "I heard, Chancellor, there were diagrams." Oliver told about this later, laughed so hard he had to sit down. That night, the two of them lay tangled together beneath the ridiculous mountain of pillows. Rain tapping softly against the windows, the way it had on the afternoon, Adrian first carried him in from the garden. Ash snored contentedly across the doorway. Somewhere down the hall, a candle guttered low. "Do you ever think about it?" Oliver asked. Half into Adrian's shoulder. "What would have happened if I had actually kept chasing you, like I was supposed to?" Adrian's arm tightened slightly around him. "I try not to. I think about it sometimes. The other version, the one where I spent years trying to get you to love me and never managed it." "You didn't have to try," Adrian said quietly. "That's rather the point. You just existed, and I fell anyway." Oliver smiled against his shoulder, warm and half asleep already. "Sap, you started it, with the dumplings. I was hungry. You told the Emperor of Solène to pass the food, like I was a servant. You were hoarding them." Adrian laughed. Quiet, easy, entirely unguarded, the kind of laugh that had once been rare enough to send the whole court into a panic, and was now, simply, the ordinary sound of their evenings. He pressed a slow kiss to the top of Oliver's head. "Go to sleep," he murmured. "Bossy, consistent." Oliver, already drifting, decided he couldn't really argue with that. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and steady, over a garden full of wildflowers planted for a man who'd once mumbled, half asleep, that he missed the smell of home, and found, without ever meaning to, that somewhere along the way, this had quietly become exactly that, the end. If this story left you smiling, or if you've ever secretly wished laziness could solve half your problems too, tell us about it in the comments. We genuinely love reading them. A like, a subscribe, and a notification bell mean more than you'd think. They're the reason we get to keep telling stories like this one. Thank you for spending this time with us, and we'll see you in the next story.